The forest was dead silent until it wasn't. A sharp, confused howl shattered the night. Too deep for a dog, too soft for a wolf. In the middle of 3 sleeping dogs, something wild was waking up. They said raising a wolf like a dog was impossible. But what if the wolf didn't know he was a wolf? This is the story of Loki, found alone in the cold, raised by 3 dogs, and caught between 2 worlds. He thought he was one of them, until nature came knocking. The wind was howling that night, and not the kind that makes you feel cozy under a blanket. This was the kind of cold that cut straight through your skin, the kind that made the trees crack, and the ground hard as stone. A lone hiker was making his way down a snow-dusted trail. Just before sunset, his boots crunched against the ice, his breath hung in thick clouds, and his headlamp barely cut through the growing darkness. He had done this trail dozens of times, but that night felt different. Off. Then he heard it, a sound so faint, he almost mistook it for wind. But there it was again, a whimper. Not quite a cry, not quite a growl. It was the kind of sound that came from something alive and in trouble. He stopped walking, held his breath, listened. Another whimper, this time closer. Desperate, scared, he veered off the path, brushing past the low branches that clawed at his jacket. And then, nestled beneath a fallen log, nearly hidden by frost and dead leaves, was a pup. Its tiny chest rose and fell fast, like a heartbeat trying to outrun time. Its fur was soaked, almost frozen in spots. Its eyes, half open, unfocused, were glassy with exhaustion. He didn't know what it was at first. A dog, a coyote. Then it opened its mouth to let out a weak, broken howl. And he knew. It was a wolf, a newborn. Alone, he stared at the tiny creature, heart pounding. He knew the rules. You don't interfere with wild animals, especially not wolf pups. There was a chance, however small, that the mother was nearby, that she'd come back, that this was just a temporary separation. But instinct told him otherwise. There were no tracks, no signs of movement nearby, just silence, just the cold, just this tiny, dying wolf. He made a call to the nearest wildlife rescue. 20 minutes later, a truck pulled up. 2 volunteers jumped out, bundled in jackets, faces stiff with concern. They took one look at the pup, and their expressions fell. This one doesn't have much time, one said. The pup's temperature had dropped dangerously low. His body was shutting down, but something in him still held on. A will to survive, a fight. They wrapped him in layers, held him close, and raced back to the rescue center. Back at the center, things moved fast. They warmed him up, fed him small amounts of special milk, placed him in an incubator, and gave him a name, Loki. It was just a placeholder, a way to log him into the system. No one expected him to live long enough for it to matter. But Loki didn't give up. Hour after hour, he clung to life. His breathing steadied, his eyes opened, and for the first time since he was found, he let out a tiny, shaky bark. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't wild. It was confused, like he wasn't sure who or what he was supposed to be. That's when the real challenge began. Raising a wild animal isn't just hard, it's nearly impossible. Wolves aren't like dogs. They're not bred for obedience. They're not meant to be inside homes or fenced-in backyards. Their instincts are ancient, deep, powerful, and unpredictable. Most wolf pups found in the wild are placed into sanctuaries, protected environments where they can grow up with their own kind. But Loki was too young, too fragile, and every nearby sanctuary was either full or unwilling to take on a newborn with such low chances of survival. The truth was, no one wanted to be the one responsible for a wolf that wouldn't make it. So Loki stayed at the center, alone, surrounded by people, yes, but no pack, no warmth, no mother, no siblings. And every day he cried, that low, confused cry that seemed to ask one thing over and over. Where's my family? Sarah wasn't looking to foster a wolf. She wasn't even at the rescue center that day. She just got a phone call. You've taken in hard cases before. We have something different. It's complicated. She'd helped bottle feed abandoned kittens, rehabilitated injured stray dogs, even once cared for a blind raccoon for a few weeks. But when she saw Loki for the first time, swaddled in a blanket, barely the size of her forearm, she froze. Is he a dog? She asked. No, they said. He's a wolf. She should have said no. She had 3 dogs at home, a full-time job, a small house, but something in his eyes, big, amber, filled with confusion, pulled at her. She thought she'd keep him for a week, 2 at most. She didn't know she was bringing home the biggest test of her life. Sarah set up a heated crate in her living room. Her dogs, Max, Bella, and Duke, sniffed curiously around the bundle. She kept them back, afraid the pup would be scared. But Loki didn't shy away. In fact, He whimpered until Sarah placed him closer to the others. He pressed his tiny body against Duke, the husky, closed his eyes, and for the first time since being rescued, slept without crying. That night, Sarah barely slept. She checked on him every hour, made sure he was warm, breathing. At 3 a.m., she found him nuzzled between Duke and Bella, his little paw resting over Max's back, and something inside her changed. He wasn't just surviving, he was starting to belong. Word spread quickly, a woman raising a wolf pup in her home. It didn't sit well with everyone. She got emails, phone calls, even threats. You're playing with fire. He'll snap one day. He's not a pet. You're making a mistake. And they weren't wrong. There was risk. A lot of it. Loki would grow bigger, stronger, smarter. He could become dangerous. He could one day turn on the dogs. Or her. Sarah didn't ignore the warnings. She read, studied, talked to experts. But still, every time she looked at Loki, she saw not danger, but longing. He didn't want to be wild. He just wanted a pack. And somehow, he had chosen hers. By the time Loki was 6 weeks old, things had shifted. He no longer cried at night. He followed the dogs everywhere, mimicking everything. How they sat, how they barked, how they played. But Sarah noticed things. Small things. Loki would stare at the trees longer than the others. He'd sniff the air with intense focus. And when birds flew overhead, he wouldn't just look. He'd crouch, like a predator. Then came the first scare. It was a lazy Sunday. The dogs were in the yard. Sarah stepped inside for 2 minutes. When she came back, Bella was hiding behind a chair. Max was pacing nervously. And Loki, he had a squirrel pinned under his paw. He wasn't hurting it, not yet, but his eyes were locked on it, focused, dark. Loki, she shouted. He didn't move. She shouted again. This time, he looked up, as if snapping out of a trance. The squirrel ran. Loki let it, but the look in his eyes stayed with her. Sarah was at a crossroads. Loki had bonded with the dogs, slept with them, played with them, ate beside them, but his body was changing. His instincts were growing louder. He was no longer the tiny pup curled in a blanket. He was fast, strong, agile. He could leap over the backyard fence without effort. He didn't like strangers, barked at loud noises, refused to wear a leash. And yet, he was gentle, loyal, loving to them. So Sarah did what no one expected. She gave him more trust, not less. She expanded the yard, built higher fences, added climbing structures and digging zones. She trained him, not like a dog, but like a wolf, respecting his instincts, not fighting them. And most importantly, she let the pack teach him, because somehow, despite it all, they were still his greatest teachers. The biggest challenge wasn't the neighbors, wasn't the critics, wasn't even the risk. It was the question no one could answer. Who would Loki become? Would he one day snap? Would he turn feral? Would his instincts overtake his love for the only family he had ever known? Sarah wrestled with it daily. Every time he stared at the trees too long, every time a rabbit darted across the yard and Loki chased, not for fun, but with precision. And then there were the dreams. He would whimper in his sleep, twitch, sometimes howl. Sarah wondered, was he dreaming of snow, of his real mother, of something he never knew but felt in his bones? The truth was, Loki was a wolf raised in a world he didn't understand. And the real problem wasn't whether he'd survive. It was whether he could truly belong. Loki was growing faster than anyone expected. 1 month passed, then 2, then 3. And the pup who once trembled in a blanket could now outrun every dog in the yard. He was lean, strong, alert. His coat thickened, deepened in color. His teeth sharper, his stare more intense. And with every passing day, the lines began to blur. He didn't howl like a wolf, but he didn't bark like a dog either. He didn't fully obey commands, but he wasn't disobedient. He didn't fit in the wild, but he didn't quite belong in a home either. He was in between, a creature caught in the gap between two worlds. And that space, the unknown, the unpredictable, was exactly where the real story began. Dogs have a hierarchy, but wolves, they have something more primal. Loki, though raised by dogs, wasn't content being the youngest, the follower. He began testing boundaries, first with Bella, gentle nips during play, then with Max, subtle challenges over food or toys, and finally with Duke, the oldest, the biggest, the one Loki respected but didn't fear. Sarah noticed the shift. The once sweet pup had begun watching the others with a calculating stillness. He wasn't aggressive, just patient, like he was figuring out the rules of this odd, hybrid pack. One morning, it happened. A bone lay between Loki and Duke. They locked eyes. Duke stepped forward, calm, asserting his role. Loki didn't growl, didn't move. He simply placed a paw on the bone, tilted his head, and waited. It was a silent standoff. Seconds passed like minutes. And then, Duke stepped back, not out of fear, but something closer to acceptance. Loki had claimed his place. He was no longer the baby. He was becoming something else. Sarah knew the time would come. Loki needed more than a backyard, more than the pack. He needed to explore, smell, hear the wind between the trees, stretch his legs on something other than grass. But could she trust him? She bought a long lead, 50 feet, a harness designed for escape artists. Treats, whistles, clickers, everything the experts recommended. The first outing was cautious. A quiet nature reserve at sunrise. No people, no distractions. Loki sniffed every inch of the car before stepping out. Once his paws hit the dirt trail, something shifted. His ears perked, his head rose, his muscles tensed. Then he ran, not away, but in big, joyous loops, pulling the line to its limit and circling back. He wasn't trying to escape. He was flying. Sarah watched, breathless. But then a deer appeared, silent, distant, but close enough to see. Loki froze. The dogs barked. Sarah called his name. He didn't move. For a second, Sarah saw something raw take over his body. His shoulders lowered, his nose twitched, his legs flexed. Predator. Then he looked back, and he came, ran straight to her, tail low, ears twitching, eyes wild but calm. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't fear. It was trust. The question that never left. What happens when he grows up? Every vet visit brought the same questions. How much bigger will he get? Are you planning to rehome him? Have you thought about what happens when he reaches full maturity? Sarah answered honestly, at first, then quietly, defensively. Eventually, she stopped going to certain clinics altogether, because truthfully she didn't know. At 8 months, Loki was larger than Max. His jaw stronger, his appetite enormous, his personality bolder, more independent. He didn't like loud noises, hated collars, refused to be bathed, but he still curled beside the other dogs when they napped, still brought his toys to Sarah, still whined if she left the room too long. The wolf in him was growing, but so was the bond. Everything changed the day of the storm. It was summer. Lightning split the sky early in the afternoon. The power went out. The air smelled like electricity and fear. The dogs huddled inside. Loki paced. He didn't like being indoors when nature screamed. Sarah opened the sliding door, thinking fresh air might help. In a flash, he bolted. Over the fence. Gone. She screamed his name, grabbed a flashlight, called the rescue center. Neighbors, friends, anyone who might help. Hours passed. The rain came down in sheets. No sign. At 3:17 a.m., she got the call. A man 5 blocks away had seen a big dog near his backyard, eyes glowing, not aggressive, just standing there, watching. Sarah drove like a maniac. When she reached the house, her heart nearly stopped. There he was, soaked, still, waiting. She opened the car door. He walked over, jumped in, and then rested his head on her lap. He had run when the storm scared him, but he came back when he could have disappeared forever. That night, Sarah didn't cry out of fear. She cried because she finally believed. Loki wasn't wild. He wasn't tamed. He was choosing them, again and again. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges. He howled at night, sometimes for hours, dug massive holes in the yard, instinctively storing food, marked everything, chased squirrels, destroyed cushions. But there were also moments of magic. Loki teaching the younger foster puppies to follow him like ducklings, curling around Bella when she injured her paw, letting Max tug on his tail without a flicker of annoyance, watching Sarah cook, head tilted, fascinated by the clatter of pans. The bond between them all wasn't based on training. It was trust, unspoken, earned, real. It was supposed to be a private journey, but one video changed that. Sarah posted a clip of Loki talking to her, making a series of howls and whines that sounded eerily like a conversation. It went viral. Suddenly, the world wanted to know more. Thousands of comments. Is that a wolf? Are those dogs safe? How is this possible? News outlets reached out. Wildlife experts, critics, supporters. Some praised her, others attacked. But one comment stood out. This is proof that love doesn't follow the rules. That family isn't about species. It's about safety, trust, and choice. Sarah printed it, framed it, put it right above Loki's food bowl. At just over a year, Loki was at his peak, healthy, strong, fully grown. And then came the break-in. Sarah was out grocery shopping. The dogs were in the yard. A man jumped a fence, thinking the house was empty. What he didn't expect, for animals waiting inside. The dogs barked, but it was Loki who stepped forward, not to attack, not to bite. He blocked the man's path. Low growl, tail high, body rigid. When the man moved, Loki lunged, not to maul, but to knock him down. Neighbors heard the commotion, called the cops. By the time Sarah returned, Loki was sitting by the door calm, as if to say, "You're safe now." Loki would never live in a forest, never hunt elk, never roam with a true wolf pack. But he wasn't trapped. He had space, purpose, connection. He played, protected, loved. He was a wolf, but he was also Loki, not wild, not tamed, just chosen. Every day, he chose to stay with them, with her, and in doing so, he redefined what it means to belong. It started with a phone call, not from a neighbor, not from a friend, but from someone Sarah never expected to hear from again, the Wildlife Agency. A calm, clipped voice. "Hi, Ms. Reyes. We have a situation we need to talk about. It concerns Loki." Her stomach dropped. She hadn't registered him with any official database. Not formally, not as a wild animal. He was vaccinated, microchipped, well-fed, loved, but he was still, by species definition, a wolf. And now, someone had reported him. She didn't know who. Maybe a passerby who saw his silhouette against the fence and got scared. Maybe someone online, one of the critics who had always insisted Loki was a danger. No matter how many calm videos she shared, didn't matter now. They were coming to evaluate the situation. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Loki lay on the floor beside her bed, paws twitching in a dream. His breath was steady, peaceful. She watched him all night. Heartbreaking. 2 officers arrived. Khaki uniforms, wildlife patches, clipboards, neutral faces. Sarah opened the door, hard in her throat. Loki stayed inside, watching from behind the glass. They asked questions, dozens of them. What does he eat? How does he interact with the dogs? Has he ever shown aggression? What would happen if he got loose near a school? Sarah answered, voice trembling but steady. Then came the moment she feared most. "We need to see him." She opened the back door. Loki stepped outside, calm, curious, head high. The officers stiffened. He looked straight at them, then walked to Sarah and sat by her side. No growling, no barking, just presence. They observed for 20 minutes, watched how he moved, how he responded to commands, how the other dogs treated him, not with fear, but with respect, like a brother. Then one officer said something that chilled her. "This is impressive, but it's still not natural." Sarah clenched her fists. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, quiet, almost apologetic. "He's not where he's supposed to be. Wolves don't belong in backyards." 2 weeks later, a letter arrived, stamped, official, heavy with consequence. They were giving her a choice. Surrender Loki to a licensed sanctuary by the end of the month. Apply for a federal wildlife exemption, which could take years and might not be approved, or face legal removal. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, letter in hand, heart pounding. Loki paced behind her, sensing the tension. He placed his massive head on her knee, looked up with those golden eyes. She broke, not into tears, those would come later, but into action. She called every sanctuary within 1,000 miles. Every single one. Most said no, too full, too complicated. Wolves were unpredictable, especially those raised with humans. Some said yes, but he'd live alone, in an enclosure. No dogs, no Sarah. One place in Colorado gave her hope, a huge forested reserve, mixed species integration, run by people who had raised wolves before. The woman on the phone sounded kind, said the right things, but she also said, "If you choose this, you can't visit often. He needs to adjust. You need to let him go." Sarah hung up, shaking. Loki sat by the window, watching the wind blow through the trees. He was a year and a half old now. In wolf years, nearly an adult. She watched his reflection and wondered, was she keeping him for him or for herself? She decided to take him for one last adventure. No leash, just woods, open, free. They drove for hours to a place no one would find them. A private piece of land a friend owned, wild, untouched. Loki leapt from the car and vanished into the trees. Sarah's breath caught, but then he returned, again and again, like a tether, invisible but unbreakable. They spent hours walking, running, sitting in silence. At one point, a fox darted across the trail. Loki chased, just a few seconds, and then stopped. Look back, always look back. That night, they camped under the stars. Sarah whispered, "If you want to leave, I'll let you. Right now. No fence, no cage, no rules. Just go." Loki stared into the dark, and then curled beside her. Didn't move all night. Back home, Sarah sat with the letter. She had until the end of the week. She poured a cup of coffee, Loki at her feet, the dogs curled nearby, and she made her choice. She wasn't giving him up, but she wasn't hiding him either. She was going to fight, applied for the exemption, reached out to lawyers, started documenting everything: behavior logs, veterinary records, training certifications. And she posted a video. Not emotional, not defensive, just the truth. A side-by-side montage. Loki as a pup, trembling in a towel. Loki chasing butterflies with Max. Loki nudging Bella's ball back toward her when she was too tired to play. Loki sitting beside her elderly neighbor, resting his giant head on the woman's lap. And she ended the video with this quote: "Wolves belong in the wild, but this one chose us, and we choose him back." The response was overwhelming. Millions of views, hashtags, petitions, celebrities reposting. Wildlife experts debated on live TV. People shared their own stories of animals who broke the mold: rescued foxes, half-coyote dogs, even hybrid cats raised with birds. The message was clear. Some animals find their own place, and some humans are strong enough to let them. 3 men in uniforms. Another inspection. Sarah's heart felt like a drumline. Loki watched them quietly. They asked questions again, observed again, and finally, the man in charge smiled. "Just a little. We've never seen anything like this. We're recommending approval for the exemption." Sarah almost collapsed. It wasn't final, but it was a step, one that meant Loki could stay, legally, fully, permanently. That night, Sarah lit a fire in the backyard. Loki lay beside her, warm and solid and calm. The other dogs slept soundly, unbothered. The stars blinked above them, and for the first time in months, everything felt still, complete. Sarah looked at Loki, not as a project, not as a risk, but as a soul, and whispered, "You're home." He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. Life didn't go back to normal, because it never had been. Living with Loki meant redefining everything: what family looked like, what rules made sense, and how love could stretch beyond species and instinct. But there was peace now, a quiet, slow-burning peace that came not from winning, but from choosing to stay. Sarah still woke early every morning, the sun cutting across the kitchen tiles, coffee in hand, dogs already sprawled on their favorite rugs. Loki always sat by the back door, waiting for it to open, not to run, not to escape, just to feel the wind. He didn't howl much anymore, at least not like he used to. Wild, uncertain, echoing the empty ache of belonging. Now he made softer sounds, huffs, chuffs, quiet grumbles, when the squirrels dared to tease from the fence. He barked sometimes too, a short, clumsy thing he'd picked up from Max, as if still trying to speak a language he hadn't been born into, but loved all the same. Was it safe? Did she trust him? Was she afraid he'd turn one day? Sarah always answered with a smile. "I don't trust him like a dog. I trust him like Loki," because by now, she knew the difference. A dog loved you because you fed him, walked him, praised him. Loki loved because he chose to. Every day, he chose to stay. And every day, Sarah chose him back. Bella's muzzle grayed first. Then Max needed help up the stairs. Even Rufus, once the clown of the trio, slept more than he played. Loki changed too, his steps heavier, his gaze slower. Not old, not yet, but not the puppy who once tripped over his own paws chasing butterflies either. Time moved gently, and Sarah found herself grateful for even the quietest moments. Watching all 4 of them nap in a sunbeam, Loki curled protectively around Bella's back, her tiny body barely noticeable against his thick fur. With it came change. Not loud, not fast, just the kind you feel more than see. Birds returning, earth softening, a breeze that smelled like beginnings. One day, while walking the property, Loki paused, stared into the trees, unmoving. Sarah stopped too. "What is it?" He didn't answer, of course, but something shifted in the air. After a long moment, he turned and trotted back to her side. Later that evening, she found a paw print outside the fence, bigger than a dog's. Not Loki's, another wolf. Wild, wandering, alone. Sarah didn't panic. She just watched. The next few nights, the visitor didn't return, but something inside Loki had stirred. Not a longing, not a sadness, just awareness, as if some thread deep within him had been tugged. Sarah did what she always did. She gave him space, opened the gate the next morning, sat quietly by the porch. Loki stepped out, walked to the woods, paused, turned around, and came back, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That was the thing people never seemed to understand. Loki wasn't trapped. He wasn't broken. He wasn't confused. He was just him, a wolf raised by dogs, who barked and played fetch, who guarded his home and loved his humans, who curled up on stormy nights and let toddlers tug his ears, but who could still hear the forest in his bones and still chose to stay. Years passed. People still sent letters, emails, messages from all over the world. "Is Loki still with you?" Does he still think he's a dog? Did he ever go back to the wild? Sarah always smiled. Yes, he was still here. No, he didn't think he was a dog. He knew exactly what he was. But being a wolf didn't stop him from loving toast crusts and belly rubs and watching cartoons with a neighbor's kid. He was a wolf, and also family. One summer evening, years after the chaos had passed, Sarah sat under the same old tree in their yard. The dogs were gone now. Each one passed peacefully, wrapped in love. Loki remained, and that night, he did something strange. He howled, not loud, not mournful, but clear and proud, then turned to Sarah and nudged her hand. She laughed. Trying to teach me your language now. He leaned into her, his huge body warm against her shoulder. And in that moment, she didn't need translation. She understood. Thank you. And now you know. This story isn't about a wolf who became a dog or a woman who tamed the wild. It's about what happens when love is given without conditions, when fear is replaced by trust, and when we let go of what should be and embrace what is. Loki was never meant to survive, but he did. And not just survive, but thrive. Because someone saw more than teeth and instinct. Because 3 dogs didn't see a threat, but a brother. Because love, real love, doesn't care what you are, only who. Subscribe for more stories that prove animals understand love better than most humans ever will.